I was used to long, late-night drives. It came with the job. Being a traveling nurse in Alaska meant hours on the road, sometimes through whiteouts so thick the world just disappeared. You got used to it. Just like you got used to double shifts, emergency calls at 3 in the morning, and sleeping in motel rooms that smelled like bleach and cigarettes. That night, I was driving back from a remote clinic just outside Palmer, heading toward Anchorage. It was almost 2 a.m. and the snow had been falling steadily since my shift ended. The radio kept warning that the storm would get worse overnight, but I figured I'd be home before it got really bad. What was I supposed to do? Sleep on a break room couch? Wait it out in an empty clinic? I just wanted to be home, so I drove. But by the time I hit the road, it had become something worse. Thick, blinding. The kind of snowfall that eats headlights whole and turns the road into a swirling, endless tunnel of white. There was no one else out. Not a single car in either direction. Just the endless snowbanks on either side of the road, telephone poles disappearing into the darkness, and those little reflective markers blinking in my high beams. I should have been used to it, but for some reason that night, something felt off. I can't explain it. Not in a way that makes sense. I had the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone, even though I knew, logically, I was. And just like that, there it was. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A figure, barely visible through the thick snow, standing on the side of the road. My foot hovered over the brake. He wasn't waving for help. He wasn't moving at all. Just standing. My high beams washed over him, revealing a bulky winter coat, hood pulled up, face shadowed. He was covered in snow as if he'd been standing there for a long time. Something about the stillness set my nerves on edge. If you've ever seen someone in real distress, someone truly in need of help, you know they don't just stand there like that. They move. They flag you down. They shiver. This person, he was motionless. I kept driving. I checked the rearview mirror as I passed. The figure didn't turn, didn't react at all. Just stood there, head slightly tilted toward the road. A heavy weight settled in my stomach. Something about this wasn't right. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was nothing. Some stranded traveler waiting for a ride. Maybe a hitchhiker who lost their nerve. But then, 10 miles later, I saw him again. Same bulky coat, same motionless stance. Closer to the road this time. My entire body went rigid. I braked without thinking, tires skidding slightly on the ice. No way. No way. There hadn't been any turnoffs, no intersections, no other cars on the road. So how the hell was he ahead of me? I turned my head slowly, my pulse hammering. The snow was coming down harder now, but I could see enough. It was the same person. Had to be. But that wasn't possible. My breathing had gone shallow. My hands were white-knuckled on the wheel. Then, for the first time, the figure moved. Not toward me, just slightly, like he was angling his body toward my car. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I threw the car into drive and floored it. The storm worsened. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. My tires crunched over ice, the car shuddering in the wind. I told myself, over and over, that I was imagining things. That the snow was messing with my vision. That stress and exhaustion were making me paranoid. But I kept looking in the rearview mirror. My gas light flickered on. I made a plan to stop at the next station. Then, out of nowhere, it appeared. Through the dense snowfall barely visible in my high beams, standing directly in the middle of the road. I reacted on instinct. I yanked the wheel, the car skidding sideways. My tires shrieked against the ice, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought I was going to spin out. And then he was gone. Not moved, not knocked down, just gone. I sat there, my breath shallow, my hands trembling on the wheel. I scanned the road, the snowbanks, the ditches. Nothing. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there at all. A queasy wave crawled up my throat. I hit the gas hard. I needed to get out of there. By the time I reached the station, I was barely holding it together. I pulled up under the lights, breathing fast, my hands still shaking. The place was nearly deserted. Just a lone attendant behind the counter, watching a tiny TV. I got out, pumped gas with numb fingers. When I went inside to pay, the guy behind the counter gave me a weird look. "You all right?" he asked. Then, before I could stop myself, I blurted, "I saw someone on the road 3 times. Same person. There was no way he could have." His face changed. Not confusion. Not mild concern. Something else. "What did he look like?" he asked. My throat felt dry. Heavy coat, hood up, just standing there. The attendant's face went stiff. He looked past me, out toward the empty parking lot, as if expecting to see something. Then he exhaled sharply. "You're the 3rd person this week to say that." I barely remember the drive home. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hooded figure standing in the road. The next day, I looked up everything I could. Missing persons reports, accidents, urban legends. Nothing. No accidents, no deaths, no warnings. I never drove that route at night again, but sometimes on long winter drives, when the snow blurs the world into nothing, I think about him, standing there, and I wonder, who else has seen them? Or worse, who else will? The storm had been flickering on and off for the last few hours, but by 11 p.m., the entire street had gone dark. My house sat on the edge of town, just far enough from my nearest neighbor that I couldn't see their lights, even if they had a generator running. I wasn't too worried. The power always came back eventually, and I had plenty of firewood stacked by the stove. Still, it was damn cold. I sat in my recliner, bundled up in a hoodie and thick socks, drinking a beer by candlelight. The snow piled up against the windows, and the wind outside howled loud enough to shake the walls. I had the radio on low, listening to a weather report. Blizzard conditions expected to last through the night. Temperatures dropping to -20 Celsius with wind chill. Stay indoors if you can. I was just about to grab another beer when someone knocked on the door. The sound made me jump. It wasn't loud, just a firm knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. No one should have been out in this weather. I got up slowly, setting my beer down on the coffee table. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. My porch light was out, so I couldn't see a thing beyond the door. I hesitated before opening it. Josh stood there, my best friend. His face was pale, his lips slightly blue. Snow caked his hair, and his hoodie was soaked through. He looked exhausted, like he'd been walking for hours. "Jesus, Josh, what the hell are you doing out here?" He exhaled, shaking from head to toe. A few miles back, thought I'd freeze to death. I pulled him inside fast. The heat from the wood stove wrapped around him, and he let out a slow, shaky breath. His hands were red, nearly frozen. I grabbed a blanket from the couch and wrapped it around him. "Man, you should have called me," I said, rubbing my hands together. "I would have come to get you." "Phone's dead," he murmured. His voice was flat, like he wasn't really there. That uneasy feeling started creeping up my spine. Josh wasn't acting like himself. I tried to shake the feeling. He was probably just in shock. He needed to warm up. I sat him down on the couch and tossed another log in the stove, filling the room with more heat. The candlelight flickered against the walls. "You're lucky I was home," I said. Could have been knocking on a door that no one was around to answer. Josh didn't say anything, just sat there, stiff, his hands gripping the blanket. I studied him. His face looked off, hollow, almost. His eyes weren't as sharp as they usually were, like he was looking past me instead of at me. I cleared my throat. "You okay, man?" His lips parted slightly. "Yeah, just tired." His voice didn't sound right. It was too low, too slow, like someone trying to mimic Josh's voice but not quite getting it right. I sat back down in my chair. For the next hour, we talked. But it was weird. Josh barely spoke. He answered in short sentences, like he had to think too hard about each word. His movements were slow and stiff, like he wasn't used to his own body. And every now and then, he would pause mid-sentence. At some point, Josh leaned back on the couch and closed his eyes. I let him rest. The guy had walked miles in a snowstorm. He deserved it. I sat there in silence, watching the candle burn down. The room flickered with soft golden light, the wind still roaring outside. Then, out of nowhere, the power came back. The lamp on the end table buzzed and flickered to life. The hum of the refrigerator kicked on in the kitchen. The sudden brightness made my eyes sting. I blinked and stretched, then grabbed my phone from the counter. 5 missed calls. I stared at the screen, all from the same number. Josh's brother, Dave. I called him back. He picked up on the first ring. His voice was shaking. "Dude, where the hell have you been?" "What?" "I've been trying to call you all night." Something about his tone made my stomach clench. "What's wrong?" A beat of silence. Then, "It's Josh." My breath caught in my throat. I looked at the couch. Josh wasn't there anymore. "What about him?" I asked slowly. Dave exhaled. His voice wavered. "He's dead." The words barely registered. "What?" "Car accident. A few hours ago. He slid off the road and hit a tree. The paramedics couldn't get to him in time. He didn't make it." The room suddenly felt too small. I forced a laugh. "Dave, that's not funny, man." "I'm not joking." My throat went dry. "That doesn't make sense," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "He was right here." Silence. Then softly, "No, he was not." For a split second, I thought maybe Dave was wrong. Maybe there had been a mistake. But then I noticed something. The blanket. It was folded neatly, untouched. Josh was gone. No sign that he had ever been there at all. I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking as I rushed to the front door and yanked it open. The storm had settled. The snow outside glowed under the streetlight. I scanned the yard, the driveway, the road. Nothing. No footprints in the fresh snow. No sign that anyone had walked up to my house that night. Just emptiness. I barely remember the rest of that night. I didn't sleep, just sat there staring at the couch until the sun came up. The next day, I drove out to the crash site. It was real. Josh's car was still there, half buried in snow, the windshield cracked down the middle. There was no way he could have survived. I never told anyone what happened that night, not even Dave, because I knew what they'd say, that it was grief, that I had dreamed it, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw. My friend had come to my house to say goodbye. I had booked the cabin for a weekend getaway, 2 hours outside of Minneapolis, tucked away in a remote part of northern Minnesota. It was exactly what I needed. Time to decompress, to read, to sit by the fire, and enjoy the solitude. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the blizzard had already started. Thick, heavy flakes swirled in my headlights as I turned off the engine and stepped out into the freezing air. The cabin was small but cozy looking, a rustic wooden A-frame surrounded by endless pine trees. The first thing I noticed about the cabin was how quiet it was. No distant traffic sounds, no dogs barking, just the wind through the trees and the soft hiss of snow falling against the roof. I grabbed my bag, my groceries, and my keys, shivering as I trudged through the snow to the front door. The lock was stiff, but it turned, and I stepped inside, shaking the cold from my coat. The place was warmer than I expected. The heat had already been turned on. Weird. The rental listing had said guests were expected to turn on the heat themselves, but maybe the owners had been by recently to check on the place. Maybe it was just good hospitality. Still, something about it nagged at me. I pushed the creeping doubt away and settled in. The first thing I did was light a fire. The fire caught, and soon the room was bathed in warmth. I made myself a cup of tea, changed into a sweater and wool socks, and stretched out on the couch with my book. The storm howled outside, the wind rattling the shutters, but inside, everything felt safe, until I saw the footprints. They were wet, dark patches against the polished hardwood floor, starting at the back door, leading upstairs. I stared at them. My heart beat suddenly too loud in my ears. The storm had already covered any tracks outside, and I had locked the door behind me. Hadn't I? I set my mug down carefully. I walked to the door, pressing my hand against the wood. It was shut, bolted. I checked the windows, sealed. Maybe the last guest tracked in some snow and it just melted slowly. Yeah, that had to be it. I went back to the couch, but I didn't pick up my book. I just sat there staring at the staircase. Hours passed. The storm got worse. I tried to push the footprints out of my mind. I read. I ate a sandwich. I watched the flames in the wood stove flicker and dance. At some point, I dozed off. I don't know what woke me. Maybe it was the wind or the creaking walls, or just the unease still twisting in my gut. I blinked groggily, sitting up on the couch, the fire still glowing softly. I looked at my phone, 2:47 a.m. Then, clear as day, I heard it. A soft, slow creak from upstairs. I sat completely still. Another creak, a floorboard shifting. The kind of sound a house makes when someone moves. I grabbed the fire poker from the wood stove. My pulse thundered in my ears. I didn't want to go up there, but I had to. I crept up the stairs. The hallway stretched into darkness. The bedroom door was half open. I nudged it open with the fire poker. The room was empty. At first, then I turned toward the closet. Something smelled wrong, like damp fabric and something faintly sour. I reached for the handle, pulled it open. A sleeping bag crumpled on the floor. Next to it, an empty water bottle, a few granola bar wrappers. My stomach twisted. Someone had been living here. I took a step back, my hands shaking. That's when it came into view. A single wet footprint leading out of the closet. I turned and ran. I flew down the stairs so fast I nearly tripped. My only thought was, get out, get out, get out. I grabbed my keys from the table, except they weren't there. The only set of footprints in or out of the house were mine. My keys had been right there. I had put them down when I came in. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The call didn't go through. No service. The storm had cut out the signal. I turned toward the bathroom, the only room with a lock. And then, from somewhere in the dark, I heard footsteps. Slow footsteps, coming down the stairs. I slammed the bathroom door and locked it. I backed into the bathtub, clutching my phone in one hand and the fire poker in the other. The house was too quiet. I tried calling 911 again. Still nothing. Outside the bathroom door, the floor creaked. A shadow passed under the crack. I held my breath. Then, the doorknob turned, gently, almost testing it. I pressed myself deeper into the tub, heart pounding. Then, it stopped. Silence. Minutes crawled by. I didn't move. Then my phone buzzed. 1 bar of service. Just enough. I dialed 911. The operator picked up. 911, what's your emergency? I forced myself to speak as steadily as possible. There's someone in my house. The operator started asking questions. I barely heard her, because right outside the bathroom door, the floorboards creaked again. I squeezed my eyes shut. I could feel someone standing there, listening. Then, footsteps, moving toward the front door. The door creaked open. A gust of freezing wind howled inside. Then, silence. I stayed in that bathroom until I heard the sirens. The police arrived 15 minutes later. The front door was wide open, snow drifting inside, but there were no footprints outside. The snow had already covered any footprints. No sign that anyone had left. Nothing was stolen. Just my keys. The officers checked the house. The only thing they found was the sleeping bag in the closet and a knife, stuffed between the bed frame and the mattress. I packed my bags and left that night. I didn't care about the storm. I didn't care about the roads. I just needed to get away. The rental company called me 2 days later. They said the last guest had checked out over a week before I arrived. No one should have been there. But someone was. Someone who had been watching me. Waiting. And I have no idea where they went. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers. Not because I don't care. I do. But I've been a mechanic for 15 years, and I've seen enough bad situations to know better. Stranded drivers, cars breaking down in the worst places, people waving you down for help, only for their buddies to be waiting in the ditch with a knife. I'm not paranoid, just careful. That night, though, I made an exception. It was late December 2018, and South Dakota was being swallowed by a storm. I'd been working a job in Sturgis, replacing the timing belt on an old Dodge Ram, and by the time I finished, it was past midnight. I had a 3-hour drive back home, but I wasn't worried. My truck was reliable, and I'd driven through worse. At first, it was just flurries. Nothing to worry about. But as the miles ticked by, the snow thickened and the wind turned sharp. My high beams were practically useless, swallowed up by the whiteout. The highway was empty. No headlights behind me, no taillights ahead, just darkness, snow, and the sound of my engine. And then I saw him. A lone figure, walking along the side of the road. I almost didn't notice him. He blended into the storm, just a dark shape against the endless white. I slowed. The guy wasn't wearing a proper winter coat, just a thin hoodie, jeans, and old sneakers, already buried in the snow. He looked half frozen, arms wrapped around himself, head down, like he'd been walking for miles. I hesitated. I was miles from the nearest town, and he was obviously in bad shape. No sane person would be out here on foot. I pulled over. My passenger side window rolled down with a squeak. "You all right, man?" The hitchhiker stopped walking. He turned his head toward me way too slowly. His face was gaunt, cheeks hollow, lips cracked, skin pale enough to look almost blue. He stared at me. Then, without a word, he stepped forward, opened the door, and slid into the seat. The smell of wet fabric and something else I couldn't quite place filled the truck. I turned the heat up. "Where are you headed?" Silence. The guy shivered violently, his hands curled into his sleeves. I tried again. "You got stranded or something? Need a lift into town?" No answer. He just stared out the window, his breath fogging the glass. I frowned, but I let it go. The dude was probably hypothermic. I eased back onto the road. The ride was quiet. Too quiet. Every now and then I'd look over, trying to get a read on him. He just kept staring out the window, watching the snow swirl past like he was looking for something. I tried again. "What's your name, man?" Nothing. His hands were trembling in his lap, fingers twitching slightly. His hoodie was soaked through. "You need me to take you to a hospital? You don't look great." Still nothing. I sighed and tightened my grip on the wheel. Something about him was off. Not just the silence, not just the way he looked. It was the way he sat. Like he wasn't really there. Like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. The highway stretched out endlessly ahead of us. The snow had thickened to a wall, my high beams barely making a dent in the darkness. Then, out of nowhere, the hitchhiker spoke. "We're not alone." I felt something twist deep in my gut. His voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. I turned my head slightly. "What?" He didn't look at me, just kept his eyes fixed on the window, his breath coming out in shallow puffs. I checked the rearview mirror. Nothing but darkness and swirling snow. But suddenly, the truck felt smaller, like there was someone else in the back seat. I kept my voice calm. "What do you mean?" His fingers curled against his jeans. He swallowed hard, like he was fighting to get the words out. "They're following us." I don't scare easy, but something about the way he said it, like it was a fact, like he was sure, made my hands tighten on the wheel. I forced a chuckle. "Well, unless they've got a snowmobile, I don't think anyone's out here with us." The hitchhiker shook his head. Then, suddenly, his entire body went rigid. His breathing picked up. He turned in his seat slightly, his head angling toward the back of the truck like he was looking at something. I took a shaky breath. The air inside felt dense, claustrophobic. He grabbed my arm. His grip was ice cold. "You need to pull over." I flinched. "No way, you'd freeze out there." His hand tightened. "Pull over, now." I looked at the road. Up ahead, there was a turnoff. A barely visible side road leading into the trees. The kind of place that didn't go anywhere good. "No chance, man. You'll die out there." He turned his head toward me for the first time since he got in. His face looked wrong. Like he wasn't sure where he was. Or worse, like he wasn't sure who I was. He yanked the door handle. Before I could react, he shoved the door open and threw himself into the snow. I slammed the brakes, tires skidding. My door flew open, freezing air rushing inside. I barely felt it. I jumped out, my boots crunching into the snow. "Hey!" The hitchhiker was already gone. No sign of him. Just endless white, the wind howling through the trees. I stood there, my skin prickling all over. Then, from somewhere deep in the woods, I heard a sound. A faint, wet scraping. Like something heavy being dragged through the snow. I wasn't about to stick around to find out what it was. I got back in the truck and locked the doors. I drove faster than I should have. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overreacting, but the truck still felt wrong. Like the air inside wasn't empty, like I wasn't alone. My stomach lurched. I slammed my foot down on the gas, and I didn't stop driving until I saw the lights of the next town. I don't pick up hitchhikers anymore. Not because I don't care, because I'm afraid the next one won't let me go. If these stories made you rethink winter getaways, hit that like button and share this video with someone who swears they'd love a cabin in the snow. Have your own chilling blizzard experience? Drop it in the comments or email me. I want to hear every eerie detail. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another nightmare. Snowstorms can be dangerous, but sometimes what's out there in the whiteout is far worse. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.